The mental phenomena seen in insight observation by Venerable Rung Ruang Papa's Saro, Dr. Rung Ruang Lim Chu Patipa. In scientific experimentation, we observe on a system of subjects under an investigation. We monitor and record on several key parameters in the experiment. Later, these observed data will be analyzed in order to determine the relationship of each component in terms of a theory or a law of nature. In Buddhist observation, the change of the states of mind is the changing of the object of consciousness in relation to the five aggregates of being. The state of mind is a reflection of the object of consciousness, and by having a continuance of mindfulness, then we can collect the changing of the states of mind in terms of mind processing. In traditional practice, it is often claimed to see spirits, ghosts, the heaven and hell, and even making a conference with the God. Scientifically, what they see are just signals processing inside the central nervous system. Whatsoever the matter of seeing and making conferencing with the spirits, the heaven or hell, and God, all of these stories are simply individual volitional formations within mind processing. It is true that an individual may be able to see the image or virtual reality of something by thinking, but whether the thoughts are reality or not, they is still questionable. But these stories are not the Dharma in Buddhism, and the Buddha had no interest in any of them because each person had its information on individuality based on the past experiences of what is happening in the volitional formations. In Buddhism, what is happening inside the mind is called mental phenomenon, which technically is an object of consciousness when having conscious. And the ability to have mindfulness to see an arising and fading away of an object of consciousness is called insight observation to see nature of mental phenomenon inside the mind. The Buddhist practice is to have insight observation on what is happening inside the mind. In the early stage of Buddhist practice in samatha, practitioner may start to experience with the varieties of mind conditions such as emotional feeling, then abandon them one by one until the mind becomes internally steadied, composed, unified, and concentrated. However, for a while the mind will struggle again, and now practitioner will experience the arising unwholesome thought of lower fetters, again by abandoning them one by one, and then the mind becomes internally steadied, composed, unified, and concentrated. And after all the five lower fetters are completely abandoned, that is, the mind is free from any unwholesome thought, then the mind will dwell into absorption, and this time practitioner will experience with the initial thought at the beginning if thinking process, again by abandoning the initial thought, the mind will be able to detect the finest mental phenomenon of the object of consciousness. In Dharmakakkappavattana Sutta, the Buddha explained nature of the object of consciousness as a pulse of arising and ceasing phenomenon, and by seeing this true nature of Dharma then the person is entering into stream entry in mind development as follows.
And while this discourse was being spoken, there arose in the Venerable Kondanya the dust-free, stainless vision of the Dharma. Whatever, the object of consciousness, is subject to origination is all subject to cessation. Then the Blessed One uttered this inspired utterance. Kondanya has indeed understood. Kondanya has indeed understood.
It should be emphasized here that whatsoever happening during the observation, we will not make any response to it, but study and collect all the information on what is happening, that is, seeing the reality at the instance of what is happening on the object of consciousness. And this is the reason why before performing insight observation, it is a must to cleanse all the unwholesome thoughts, so that there is no any kind of thinking left to disturb the insight observation. In the early part of performing the Buddhist practice starting with having a common mindfulness, in this circumstance we will be able to see the kinds of strong emotional feeling, and still it is not sensitive enough to see a slight object of consciousness in details as happening in the process of dependent origination. Therefore, during the practice of samatha part, the mindfulness will be empowered to become purified mindfulness so that it will be powerful enough to detect even a slight signal of the object of consciousness, and then we can perform an observation into the inner mind of the process of dependent origination. After then, by making a perfect insight observation of the five aggregates of being, and seeing a whole system of mind processing in the process of dependent origination to gain insight wisdom for the destruction of the taints. In Buddhism it is to observe the mental phenomena in inner mind. In many suttas the Buddha explained about insight observation very clear on what to be observed, especially in the four mindfulness foundations on body, feeling, mind, and dharma, was to observe on the object of consciousness in relation to life including body, feeling, perception, volitional formations, and consciousness, respectively. In order to understand this statement clearly, the first part is to understand the meaning of seeing phenomenon in the phenomena, such as seeing a body in the body, seeing a mind in the mind. It means that seeing an object of consciousness of a thing, for example, when saying seeing a body, a feeling, a mind, and dharma as follows.
He understands the mind, he understands phenomena, and he understands the fetter that arises dependent on both, and he also understands how the unarisen fetter arises, and how the arisen fetter is abandoned, and how the abandoned fetter does not arise again in the future. The arising of the object of consciousness in relation to the body, the feeling, the perception, the volitional formations, and the consciousness. In this way he dwells contemplating phenomena in phenomena internally, externally, and both internally and externally. And he dwells independent, not clinging on anything in the world. That is how anyone dwells contemplating phenomena in terms of the six internal and external sense bases.
In the part of statement in this sutta, the words, seeing it externally and internally, we have to understand the difference between words, external, and internal. That, external in this context, means an external mental phenomenon, which typically is a stimulus arriving into the mind. While internal in this context is an internal mental phenomenon which is internally formulated within the mind. For example, when saying, seeing an external body, it means seeing an object of consciousness of arriving stimulus in relation to a body, like seeing a beautiful girl. And when saying, seeing an internal body, it means seeing an object of consciousness of internal formulated mental phenomenon, like thinking of a beautiful girl. Similarly, the words of externally and internally of the feeling, the perception, the volitional formations, the consciousness, and the dharma have the same interpretations as in case of the body as follows.
When having consciousness, we should have mindfulness to keep the mind to be stable, not to be bothered with an external object of consciousness, and also not to be involved with an internal object of consciousness so that the mind will not proceed on any troubling suffering.
The Buddha's students who were not familiar with the insight observation technique then came to ask the Venerable Mahakaccana for advice, and he elaborated about the meaning of the above Buddha's statement in details as follows.
When the Buddha said not to be bothered with an external mental phenomenon, it means that when stimulus arrives at a mind as an external mental phenomenon and consciousness intercepts it as an object of consciousness, then we should have mindfulness immediately and holding the mind not to cling on the object of consciousness so that the mind is stable not to be involved in any volitional formations from the arriving stimulus. In the meantime, the Buddha's statement that not to be involved with an internal mental phenomenon, it means that by performing the Buddhist practice till the condition of a purified mindfulness is developed, by then no matter what an external received stimulus, or an internal mental phenomenon that is generated from volitional formations, the purified mindfulness will hold the mind to become internally steadied, united, and concentrated from any kinds of disruptions from both external and internal mental phenomena.
In performing insight observation, it must be clearly understood that we use mindfulness to make an observation on both an arising external and internal mental phenomenon within the mind. The Venerable Sariputta explained on what to be observed in insight observation as follows.
What is the observed mental phenomenon for examples, form, feeling, perception, volitional formations, consciousness, external sense fields, internal sense fields, receptors, mind consciousness, ignorance, contact, craving, clinging, existence, birth, aging and death, etc.?
In performing the insight observation, there are two aspects of investigation analysis, that is, a snapshot of observation on a particular mental phenomenon, and the continuity observations of a series of mental phenomena in the mind processing as follows. On the part of the individual observation on a particular mental phenomenon, we will investigate on the arising and ceasing of phenomenon, the cause and effect of the phenomenon, the benefit and harm of the phenomenon, and the element of the phenomenon as it is a part of nature. Then we can realize that each mental phenomenon is no self, and then the mind will be liberated. And on the part of the continuity observations of a series of mental phenomena in the mind processing, we will investigate on the cause and effect of each phenomenon, and then explore into the overall system of mind processing in the subjects of the six sense bases, and the process of dependent origination, and then we can realize that life is no self. And once being able to see the object of consciousness in associated with any of the five aggregates, including body, feeling, or mind, then the dharma of the truths of life within nature is gained. Specifically, what do we really see in insight observation as a series of dependently phenomena happening inside the mind? It is exactly the same kind of observation that the Buddha performed on the day of his enlightenment, and seeing the whole process of dependent origination. And the matter of how accurate a person can see the truths of life, not just thinking, depends on the way to perform the Buddhist practice in accordance with the Buddha's teachings. When performing insight observation, as the objects of consciousness arise and fade away in a stream of consciousness, the associated series of states of mind are detected as mind processing in terms of the process of dependent origination. The Buddha emphasized the importance of the process of dependent origination as follows. Seeing the process of dependent origination is to see the Buddha. Seeing the Buddha is to see the process of dependent origination.